Of course, the best time to get disability insurance is the day before you get disabled. And since you don't know when that's going to be, you probably want to
Right.
get when you're the most insurable, when you have the most options, when it is the least expensive.
Welcome to another episode of the Physician Growth Accelerator podcast, a show where we break down your medical practice systems into vitals, diagnose root cause of what may be restricting your growth, and prescribe what to do about it. I'm your host, Zed Williamson, and I believe that everything you experience is the perfect outcome of your current system. And there's freedom in understanding that. If we don't like what we're experiencing, that's fine. We can take responsibility, take a step back, and tweak the system. And we're going to talk about something very specific today. I'm really excited about our guest, Dr. Jimmy Turner, a practicing anesthesiologist and founder of Money Meets Medicine and the Physician Philosopher, author of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance and Determined How Burned Out Doctors Can Thrive in a Broken Medical System. He's also the host of the Money Meets Medicine podcast. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Zed. Super excited about this.
So I want to just jump right into it because you talk about something that it may be in the front of many minds of physician business owners. It may not be. And that's probably even more important if it's not. And that is disability insurance.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear, and maybe you just start here, where go through your origin story of why you are so passionate about this topic and making sure some specific things for those physician business owners out there.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. My journey starts back when I was a fourth year med student, and my wife and I, we had our first kid. She's 13 now, which is a bit insane. And when we had Grace, we decided to be adults and do adult like things like get term life insurance. And I didn't really know who to talk to because I knew nothing about personal finance at this point. I didn't grow up in a household that talked about money. Certainly didn't learn anything about it in college or in medical school. And so ended up finding a brother in my medical school class. One of my classmates had a brother in medical school. And so I was like, yeah, sure. It's a guy I can trust. He's the brother of a medical school classmate of mine. And so went and talked to him. And long story short, he's like, yeah, we can get you life insurance, but we should also have you apply for disability. And I don't have an income at this point. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But again, I am completely and totally financially illiterate at this stage of my life. And so I say no a couple times, ends up talking me into it, puts me through a fully underwritten process where they look into all of your medical problems. And I have an essential tremor. I've got about another couple of medical diagnoses. I end up getting denied. And again, know nothing about money. So I'm like, oh, that's probably not a big deal. I'll just get it later when I get down the road. So I get to training and I find out that there's something called the guaranteed standard issue policy, where basically you can have any medical history and they will still give you disability insurance so long as you haven't been disabled and you haven't been denied. And so since I got denied as a fourth year med student who had no business applying for a disability policy, to this day, I can't get it. And that all happened because an insurance agent didn't do the right thing for me. They didn't tell me not to apply. They didn't tell me, hey, there's this thing called a GSI you're probably going to have when you're in training. That's what you should get. And it all comes down to incentives and conflicts and how people get paid ultimately. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I didn't know back then. And so, yeah, my introduction to the industry, the financial industry, was a rough one. And not 6 months later, my medical school brought in a speaker from GL Advisors, was the name of the firm back then. And they're taking names, like, email addresses, that sort of thing. And it felt pretty sleazy at the time. I didn't really know what to make of it. But not 3 years into my training, that CEO was talking to us that day, got thrown in jail for fraud. And so like I had this massive distrust of the financial industry, and that kind of carried on when I started learning about personal finance and being in academics. People wanted me to teach them about it, so I did. There was a need, and with me throughout that entire time, I carried that North Star of making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other people, that they have the information that they need to protect themselves. And when you run a business and you have a practice, turns out that your income is the number one asset you need to protect, because if you lose your income, it doesn't matter what you know about investing or paying down debt. It is paramount to protect the one thing that determines all other things financially. So I've been very passionate about it for years now.
Yeah. Wow. That's a powerful story. It's amazing the motivation that we can get when we feel so burned by something and we're witnessing the opportunity for other people to be burned. So we have to, it's like, this may sound strange internally at our organization. We call things like that pulling kids out of traffic. Like, you don't go, oh, that's not my kid. You, like, no matter what, you get someone out of harm's way. And when those things happen to you and it drives you, I think it's unfortunate. And then it creates so much opportunity for other people.
Yeah,
One thing that, oops, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, it's something that we continue to see. I mean, we have people come to us all the time. They're like, "Hey, yeah, I'm in training, and I've got type 1 diabetes, or I had a lymphoma diagnosis 4 years ago, and this agent's trying to put me through this policy. I don't know if it's the right thing to do." And we literally pull doctors out of traffic all the time when they should be getting a GSI, or when the other agent's not telling them about a policy that exists because it doesn't make them money. And so it's something that I very much relate to.
Yeah. Something we hear very commonly with physician business owners specifically is the world of private practice is slightly different today. 20 years ago, mediocrity paid pretty well. And what I mean from that standpoint is the mediocrity of the health of a business. Today, reimbursements are declining. It's harder to negotiate contracts. Costs are going up. Sometimes it's hard to find people that really work for your organization. It's different. And so that puts stress on the business. And you bring up a very important point, is that this income, this asset, may be unprotected. So do you find that people are not thinking about this until it's too late? Like, what are you seeing in the industry as it relates to people having just an opinion or a concept about this insurance?
Yeah, I think it comes from a couple different places. One is that you're going to hear about disability insurance because there are very well-known companies out there that target physicians. And unfortunately, a lot of those companies are not going to do what's best for you. It's pretty unusual to get out of training and just have never heard about disability insurance. I think most people realize, oh, that's something I probably need to do. And then they wait and they wait and they wait. And so, of course, the best time to get disability insurance is the day before you get disabled. And since you don't know when that's going to be, you probably want to
Right.
get when you're the most insurable, when you have the most options, when it is the least expensive. And so it's not something that people don't think of. It's just that they put it on the back burner and they handle it too late. And so we'll have somebody that comes in, they own a practice. Verifying income from a practice owner is a little bit tougher than a W-2
Sure.
employee. And so that kind of brings in some challenges as well. But then, yeah, you find out, hey, I should have gotten disability insurance 24 months ago when I was still in residency or fellowship. And that burns people pretty badly. And so it is something, though, I think most people come out of training being aware of. They just don't know where to get it, how to get it, who to trust. And those end up being the bigger issues.
Yeah. It makes sense, right? Our brain is focusing on so many different things, and if there's ambiguity around a process, we tend to avoid those things because we just don't know what steps to take. And then also, there's part of our brain that tells us that, hey, today we're good, so that means I'm kind of invincible, right? And it's hard to think about, let me purposely do something in case something horrible happens.
Right.
We do not like thinking that way. Do you hear that from people when they're going through the process?
Yeah, I think that, and maybe I'm just slanted this way because I'm an anesthesiologist, but the way that I tend to think about things, there's two questions in medicine, right? One is, if something happens, how bad is it going to be, and the other one's, how likely is it to happen? And I think disability insurance fits perfectly into that model that I'm used to thinking through as an anesthesiologist. I'm like, hey, how likely is this to happen? It's not very likely. Okay, but if it does, how bad would it be? And that second question is often what leads us to do things in medicine to prevent harm from happening to patients. And certainly that's applied to disability insurance. Are you likely to become disabled? No, you're probably not. There's but not an insignificant proportion of physicians that do. And when they do become disabled, it is catastrophic. And so, when you think through it in that kind of way of thinking that you're used to applying to medicine, it makes a bit more sense.
Yeah. What would you say is the thing that people are most surprised by once they go down this process, um, learning about options and taking the right steps with someone they trust?
Yeah, I think that what people, if they reach out and find the right people, they're going to find that there's a lot more options out there than they're typically told. What'll happen oftentimes if an insurance agent is employed by a specific company is that they will very heavily promote that product from that company. And
Sure.
with an agent that's not captive to a single company, they are completely independent. They're not employed by them. Their benefits don't come from them. They are not, paid directly as an employee from that company. there are people out there that can show you the options that exist at all of the companies and all of the options that you have within each of those companies. And so I think people can be a little surprised because they've gone to one agent. That one agent showed them, one or two policies from one or two companies and didn't show you all five. Because at the time of this recording, there are five companies that provide own occupation disability insurance. And then they start realizing, oh, like I can get it from all five of these companies. And actually, this one company they didn't show me is less expensive and is a pretty good policy. And this is an option. And then as they go through the process, of course, they get educated on things that they may not know of, future purchase increases, from training to when they finish. And you make more money, you need more protection, or, what a residual or partial disability is, because that's really important. Practice owners in particular. If you're running a practice, you get disabled, you might be going from making 100% of your income to nothing, right? That part makes sense. But what happens when you come back from a disability and you're not quite up to 100% yet? You're working 2 or 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week or 7 days a week. Well, you're going to have 30 or 40 or 50% of your income. And some insurance policies are going to say, well, you're working some, so we're going to stop paying
Yeah.
you.
Either on or off. Yeah, that's a really good call out. That's huge.
Yeah. And so you want to have a ramp back up to your full-time work as you're able to, coming back from your disability. And if you don't have a residual or partial disability rider on your policy, that's a pretty bad problem because you have that gap between 0 and 100 that may not be covered.
Yeah, wow, that makes so much sense. Is there a point, or maybe do you hear from people where they've gotten to the point where I guess it's too late for me to get this type of insurance? Like, is there a point where someone should just blow it off completely?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you don't need disability insurance when you're financially independent, right? So that side of the equation, and by that I mean, you've got 25 to 30 times your annual expenses saved in retirement accounts for retirement. That's financial independence. You tell me that, hey, I spend $200,000 a year, I got $6 million in retirement account. I say, hey, you don't need disability insurance. So that end, we know you don't need it. As you kind of back off and get closer to that, let's just say that age where you're not financially independent, you're still saving, but your age is creeping up, disability insurance becomes more expensive. If you tell me, hey, I got diagnosed with this autoimmune disease last year, it was pretty debilitating, you're probably not going to be insurable, right? So the points at which you get too far along the road is your age, getting close enough to financial independence, and combining that with the fact that as you get older, it gets more expensive. You could easily talk me into, hey, Jimmy, I'm just going to roll the dice. Like I got 5 years till retirement. I know that I'm not there yet. And I would say like, hey, that's perfectly reasonable. And then the unfortunate one is when somebody develops a medical diagnosis that they didn't anticipate having. Right. So, I'm 38. I ended up getting diagnosed with Graves' disease at the age of 32, 33, had anxiety and depression that came along with that. I didn't expect any of that to happen in my early 30s. You feel like you're invincible, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so there is a point at which not only is it too late, but like you just can't get it. So that's the big one to avoid.
Yeah. But I like to call that out because, again, going back to how our brain is set up, sometimes we give ourselves reasons or excuses as to why not to do something because we don't want to expend the mental energy, or we don't want to expend the perceived mental energy.
Sure.
Um, and it's, probably because people have heard kind of the horror stories of why you started going down this path. And then the way our brain works with negativity bias and confirmation bias is we take that overgeneralization of that negativity and basically turn it into cynicism across all things.
Mhm.
And so if it was bad here, that means it can't be good. And now I'm going to ignore it and put my ostrich head in the sand as opposed to taking action.
Yeah, I think that happens in pretty much all areas of personal finance. Doctors like, well, it's just too complicated, right? I can't learn this stuff, and so I'm just going to ignore it. And potentially even worse is I'm just going to hire a financial advisor that handles everything, and I don't understand what they're doing. And I can guarantee you almost always in that situation they're taking you to the woodshed and you have no idea. And so either one of those is not a good option. Like burying your head in the sand and just ignoring stuff isn't a great option. Burying your head in the sand with personal finance and just saying I'm gonna let someone else completely handle all of that. You'll find out 20 or 30 years from now was not a great option. And so it's important not to ignore this stuff. But I will, and I do often say, if you can learn medicine, you can learn money. Medicine
Oh,
is
man.
infinitely more complicated than personal finance. And I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, there's only like 3, 4, 5 tasks you really have to accomplish. And you can do all of them on your own. It doesn't take that much effort to learn it.
I'm so glad you said that. It drives me nuts when I hear people make this generalization that, well, doctors just aren't good business people. No, it's just not what they went to school for. I mean, if, like you said, medicine is way bigger than how to structure a healthy business. But if you put zero attention there, well, then yeah, it's going to seem like a weakness. And so I'm glad you called that out about finances as well. And I think also going back to how our brain is set up, sometimes we believe that we need to know all things about a subject for it to be worth me taking those steps.
Right.
And so, what would you say if there's someone who's like, well, I don't have time to learn about finances. I don't want to go down that path. I'm really naive and I don't know anything. What would you tell them realistically is what percent or something, do they really have to learn everything?
Yeah. So the subtitle of my book would answer that question. Right? It's the 20% that you need to know to get 80% of the results. It's the Pareto principle. And I love it when doctors are like, I don't have the time. I'm like, okay, so you never commute to work, you never work out, you never do laundry, you never do dishes. There's never a moment in your life where you could put headphones in your ears while you're doing something else and listen to an audio book or a few podcasts like this. And by the very nature of the fact that you're listening to this right now, you in fact do have time
You
and
already do. Yeah.
time to build that financial foundation. And it really isn't that bad, right? You need to get term life insurance if you got someone dependent upon your income. You need to get disability insurance. You need to understand investing, which you can read 500 books. It's going to boil down to low cost diversified index fund strategies. And so like there are really not that many things. You need to get your estate. You need to get your will done, right? And so as you check off these boxes, some of them are just like, I need to learn enough right now just to check this box off. And you never have to do it again. It's the one decision that makes all decisions for you moving forward. And so it doesn't require that much time. And some of these things, once you do them, you don't have to worry about it after that, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. That's great. That's That's perfect. Yeah, I love the subtitle. And speaking of podcasts, the Money Meets Medicine podcast. This sounds like this would be a good place for people to also start dipping their toe in and start learning. What should someone expect listening to that podcast?
Yeah, so I host it weekly with Justin Harvey, who I believe the listeners on this show may be familiar with,
Yep.
and so that's our Wednesday show. And I'm actually just starting to dip my toes into interviewing people on Friday episodes will be coming out. So depending on when you listen to this, that may have already happened. But yeah, you can expect all things personal finance, career, business, and medicine over there, and we do try to keep things pretty high level. Occasionally dive into the weeds, but generally speaking, try to keep it educational and high level so that people, no matter where they're coming from, can still learn. Whether you are brand new to personal finance or you know a little bit, and oftentimes even if you know a lot.
I think people likely appreciate that you're coming to it with as a practicing physician, you can share that perspective and they benefit from understanding your perspective to probably grab ideas even faster.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the beauties of it. To be honest with you, is that I do work in medicine. I still practice academic anesthesia in North Carolina at Wake Forest, and love what I do. So I didn't leave medicine to help in the personal finance space. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I definitely have my feet in both worlds. Run a business. I'm also a W-2 employee, so I can relate to both sides of that. And to your point earlier, I agree that physicians have the skills and the ability to run a business, and I think that's important to take home. But it's been a fun journey figuring this stuff out and helping other people. But there is a definite amount of know, like, and trust that happens because I work as a physician in this space.
Yeah,
And at the end of the day, like, you need to find someone you can trust, and it's a little bit easier if you know the person has walked in your shoes and continues to do so.
absolutely. Well, Jimmy, I really appreciate you joining us today. It's Money Meets Medicine podcast. We'll put a link to that in the show notes to make it easy for people. And if you have questions about personal finance, check out the podcast and the book. I'm a huge fan of podcasts and books. I feel like they're cheat codes for our lives because we get to download all this information that someone else lived decades to put together, and you get it in a few hours. So there's a lot of power in that. And if you're feeling that squeeze between the top end revenue of your practice and the cost to operate, maybe some stress about internal culture, it feels like you're working more but not making more, check out the Physician Growth Accelerator website and check the vitals of your business. It's a simple online quiz. It's going to point out maybe where you need to focus to help increase the health of the business side of your practice. And with that, thanks, Jimmy, and we'll see you next time on the Physician Growth Accelerator.